course will cover the topic of folk and minor art in India. To begin a topic like this, we must clarify certain aspects of its understanding, how we understand and recognize it, how we define it, how folk art is generally understood and how it should be understood. And these are the things which will work as the focal interest for the whole course. Study of Indian folk art in the contemporary milieu becomes much more relevant as it undergoes change. The conventional understanding of folk art is related to the ritualistic customs, the customary aesthetics, and some other utilitarian purposes are connected to it. The common understanding of its function is to authenticate a cultural identity of a particular place, a particular nation, a society, and moreover the ethnic society that holds a collective community value, and the aesthetics that is reflective of the comprehensive expression of the world's traditional culture. Nevertheless, the contemporary scenario clearly indicates the practice today is not confined to people who are unexposed or they're ignorant of what is going on around them socially and culturally. So they have certain exposure to the cultural scenario of the present world. The folk artists are connected to the museums, the government policies, the non-government agencies, the foreign collectors, the foreign patrons, the cultural historians, and also the tourists, the travelers. The artists from different region are also known to each other as they attend the similar kind of activities together. They participate in different kind of national and international exhibitions, art camps, art fairs, and also they compete with each other for the for different kind of cultural activities. So in a way, when we talk about this particular practice, it's undergoing a lot of different cultural issues that is finally working as an operational factor, and that is also changing the mode of definition from time to time. If we look at it as the post-colonial policy of our country, where it stood somewhere with some relevance, we see that initially the traditional art forms with an ethnic religion base in the context of India were treated as a source of commercial revenue generation. And that was a post-colonial policy. It was designed that way. But then the traditional art forms flourished as a cultural industry rather than an artistic expression for a very long time in the beginning of it. It is rather a recent phenomenon that the interest in traditional art forms is directed towards exploration of the expressive potential of its aesthetic idioms. This is used as a language and the mode of communication, and moreover, most importantly, it is used as an artistic expression, and this is independent of any other cultural politics that is related to the shaping up of this particular practice in the post-colonial cultural policies of the country. The social and cultural anthropologists They pioneered in collecting the record and undertook documenting the cultural art forms in their own terms, in their own ways. At the same time, the modern artists, after some initial hesitation, connected with its simplistic principle that was instrumental to support modern expressions and aesthetics. Folk art represents the world's ethnic culture. A general understanding of folk art forms are made for uh, the people, and they're created by the people for the people. The definition thus undergoes recurring changes as people who practice the art form undertake dynamic lifestyle to suit their time. Now, in this context, we must not skip on a few very important issues that will make it more clear to us why we aim at studying this topic from an academic direction. That is also connected to the political scenario of our country over the past 100 years, and we can go back farther. So, if we just go back to the time of Swadeshi movement that took place in Bengal in 1905, that was intellectually supported by the Tagores, namely Abanindranath, Rabindranath and Gaganendranath Tagore, E.B. Havel, Anand Kumar Swami, Sister Nivedita, and many more, to establish a national pedagogy which is free from the European influence. And that was perhaps a need of nationalism in that particular time. So E.B. Havel, for him, the emphasis was on the authenticity in reference to the pre-Islamic India, whereas Ananda Kentic Kumaraswamy had a cultural nationalist agenda when he approached towards this particular domain. And that was something which particularly questioned the nature of Gandhara art in the traditional form in search of a route that flowed into the initiatives of Mahatma Gandhi, who entered Indian politics in 1915. Nationalism was largely molded by the ideology of late 19th century arts and crafts movement led by John Ruskin and William Morris of Europe, who went against the mechanized productions with the romantic notion. When we look at the nationalism, the nature of nationalism, which uh, took birth in 1905 or post 1905 Bengal, we feel that it's through Sister Nivedita that the art and craft movement, the ideology of art and craft movement of Europe was reassessed, and they felt that we can have a nature like that in the regular lifestyle and the regular cultural practices in our country to get back our lost identity. When we say that it's a lost identity, we also held ourselves responsible to make a few comments on why the crisis took place at the first time. It's all because when the countrymen were losing some kind of faith on the cultural identities of our nation, it was very important to go back and find out certain pure practices which existed in our country much before the foreign invasions had taken place in many different forms in many different times. Latest was the longest, the Europeans from the Britishers who came from Britain and stayed back, ruled for a very long time. But it was a time when we wanted a Swaraj, or the self-ruling, self-governance. So in that particular time, getting back to a cultural identity and feeling confident about our cultural root was very, very relevant for the nationalists. And that is perhaps the reason that we looked back, we started looking for the specimens which are still, in a dying stage, but it was available there. And that's how it all started. But then, when we started bringing the context of people like Mahatma Gandhi, who dreamt of nationalist India, we must also think of the notion of Tagore in the nationalist context, where the notion was much more romantic. He thought of a social utopia along with Nandalal Bose, Sister Nivedita, that they thought of a condition which is much more in an ideal situation. What should be the ideal village? What should be the ideal living for the Indians in that particular time? Just before the independence, it was something which was shaping up, that was conceived by all these people with a lot of romantic notion, that was connected to the big murals and the impact of them, and how they can also operate the basic culture of mass production, how we can give more emphasis to the handcrafted objects that is our own. But not everywhere it reflected the reality, and we must understand those intricate details of this particular phenomenon. So, when we talk about the romantic world of Tagore, we talk about Gandhi's idea of self-sufficient village to raise anti-colonial struggle. Tagore, as a romantic, he materialized the cultural utopia in the form of the making of Shantiniketan, an academic institute where the local people and the students, they live together with some cultural practices which gave it its identity. There had been another notion that got introduced by 1942 by another name who was B.R. Ambedkar. On the other hand, he presented the ground reality of the Indian village that was actually the center of violence. It was not really a smooth sell for the Indian village concept that took place in Shantiniketan. It was, on the contrary, that he said that these are far from being romantic sites of cultural harmony, and that is a point that had to be addressed in that context. Now, when we call the art practices of these rural areas as the tribal art, folk art, Adivasi art, they may also mislead us to a great extent. These are some terms that are created by the British colonial administrative heads for their own convenience. And it was all coined by the British colonial administration while they were mapping its subject population into a conventionally classified ethnographic category. That actually had got nothing to do with how it is in today's time. The term tribal was formulated to classify revenue paying and the non-revenue paying sections of the population. It covered all pre-agrarian communities, the forest dwellers and their cultural practices. The term folk described the popular rural art and craft that experiences social economic changes with some affinity to higher classical culture that organically grow within the obligatory social customs of the pre-colonial nation. The term Adivasi is directly connected to the indigenous population of a region that has possibilities of some ageless primitive aesthetics, devoid of any apparent instrumentalism, And also, the unchanged aesthetics bring a new definition which is close to the modernist ideology of Europe again, where we felt that we should not borrow from anywhere else and we must simply stick to the ideology of the past India, how it was and how the tradition is leaving in the contemporary notion. But again, we connected nationalism with these two different factors, because when we talked about modernism, modernism came through primitive art and culture in Europe. So we borrowed the idea to certain extent from Europe again, but in a very nationalized way. In the context of Indian folk and minor art, the operational factors were nationalism and modernism in connection to a cultural politics.